Welcome to Inside the Outside. I'm Gary Kirk.
And I'm Christy Kirk. And I bet you don't drink enough when you're on the trail.
You probably don't eat right either.
This week, we talked to the University of North Carolina professor, Dr. Anthony Hackney, about what you need to eat and drink to have the best experience on the trail.
We're also going to do a review of the Cairn subscription box.
Is it Inside the Outside approved or not? Stay tuned to find out. So it's time to get muddy. The Rugged Maniac is just around the corner. Gary, this is your first obstacle race ever.
I've been training religiously ever since I signed up months ago.
I don't think sitting down or lying on the couch counts as training.
You have to get up every time you lay down. So if I lay down a lot, I get up a lot.
Yeah. You're going to have a nice eye-opening experience. This will be my third obstacle race, but the Rugged Maniac is a fun one. So I'm looking forward to that. Now, oftentimes you hear people say, are you going to carb load before a race? So
Right.
Is that your plan?
Well, yeah, I've got a box of Oreo cookies set aside, but because I need to balance that with the right amount of fats and proteins, I've got a huge glass of milk to go with them.
I don't think any of that is what people are talking about when they talk about carbo-loading. But we're going to learn all about that today with Dr. Anthony Hackney.
Well, Tony, we really appreciate you joining us here today. Looking forward to the conversation about nutrition. What can you tell me about your background? What makes you the expert in this field that we're talking about?
Well, Gary, it's a pleasure to be here. And my background is I'm a professor here at UNC in exercise physiology as well as in nutrition, and have been here for 30 years now, almost. So I've worked a long time in this field. But in the context of practical experience, I was with the Department of Defense as a postdoc where I worked with military field operations, soldiers, Marines, Air Force personnel, NATO personnel who are involved in going out for a week, 2 weeks, sometimes up to a month, marching and, if you will, doing war game maneuvers where they were doing what hikers do, but in the context of not only carrying backpacks with supplies and food, but weapons and such. So they were doing lots of humping through the wilderness.
And your role was to help them fuel the most efficiently.
So we were, our research team that I was engaged with, we were looking at what's the kind of meals people should be eating that are engaged in that. And one of my expertise was environmental conditions. And so I did a lot of work in cold weather exposure. I got to climb Mount McKinley, Denali in Alaska, and working with this kind of work. And we were developing what you're probably familiar with meals ready to eat that use, yes, good old MREs. Well, there's what's called ration cold winter, which is a MRE that's designed for hiking and working in cold weather operations. And it has a different composition to the food. And our research group was involved with developing that.
Oh, that's very exciting, very interesting.
So I'm sure that when it comes to this, there's a certain amount of science and math behind creating the perfect MRE or this cold weather version. What's sort of the breakdown as far as like your protein needs, your carbohydrate needs, things like that?
There's the science, and then there's the practical, oh my gosh, I've got to put this in my pack and carry it for the next week. And that's load that is making it even more strenuous. So one of the things you find is the kind of activity that you're doing, endurance in this nature for hours a day, you need lots of carbohydrate. That carbohydrate is just a necessity as a predominant macronutrient, and if you think of fat and protein being the other two, because we don't store carbohydrate very well in our bodies. We all have the capacity to store it, but we only have a few hours of storage. Most of us have days worth of fat stored on our body.
I can pack that on in a heartbeat.
We have plenty of protein and in that context, but carbohydrate becomes the critical macronutrient. And it depends on the endurance activity, how strenuous it is. But typically, the more strenuous it is, the more you want your diet to be skewed towards carbohydrate. And if someone was saying, well, give me a breakdown, all right, 50 to 60% of your daily intake when you're out doing something like that should be in the form of carbohydrate.
Okay.
So what does that translate into for someone who's backpacking or going on a multi-day kayak trip or something like that? What kind of things should we pack?
In that context, the problem with carbohydrate is it's bulky. All right.
Yeah.
And
fresh fruit, things like that.
Yes.
Even dehydrated fruit, still a little bulky.
And the camping meals that are pasta or rice, they are dehydrated, but still in the context of macronutrients, carbohydrate's not what we call calorically dense. So you tend to need a lot of it. Fat is calorically dense, protein's calorically dense, so it's easier. But in eating, what do you need? You need the carbohydrate for these activities. So in the context of being more practical, one of the things I tell people is hydration's really important. And it's important that you drink, adequate amounts of water on a daily basis. But if you want to try to supplement your carbohydrates, you're not having to carry so much, good old Gatorade, powdered form that you can put into your water has carbohydrate. So what you're doing there is getting some carbohydrate when you're getting your hydration, and it's relatively lightweight.
Small and lightweight.
Right. In the context of food, if you're like, well, I've just put in 4 hours today and I'm starved, and what am I going to fix? You know what? Again, I know it gets kind of crazy, always things like pasta and rice and mashed potatoes, but those are good, complex sources of carbohydrate that after several hours of endurance activity, that's going to help you replenish during the night when you're resting for the next day. So that really is, kind of a crux. But in the context of, that's a lot for me to carry. Well, cheat a little bit, and in the context of your fluid replacement, be working on getting some carbohydrate throughout the day. That way you don't have to eat quite as much in the evening and pack in as much over the course of several days.
I think that's such a fascinating tip because, one, I've never heard that before. And everything I read tells me don't, and of course I'm not reading for endurance, but it's saying don't drink your calories. Right. So, Gatorade, I'm not drinking, and I'm being really careful, but I love the idea of taking those little Gatorade single packs. And what a terrific tip. And then you're also dealing with the electrolytes. So you don't need to think about maybe the chews that runners use or anything like that.
And there are so many little supposedly helpful aids like that, some of which have a good scientific basis and some are just great marketing. All right. And so, I think it becomes important to think about, this electrolyte chews. All right, yes, you lose electrolytes, but if I'm drinking a sports drink, and again, I'm not endorsing Gatorade, but it's the one everyone knows and it's very readily available, Powerade's available too, kind of thing, you probably don't need those. All right, you would have to be something electrolyte chew to replace. You probably are going to have to be in a really hot environment, many, many hours a day, tremendous amount of sweat loss before you're in a deficiency where a supplement like that's going to be beneficial. What you're normally eating, and again, if you're using some sport drink supplementation in the context of your fluid replacement, you're going to be fine.
So I've heard several rules of thumb about hydration through the course of the day. Without doing the endurance activities, just on a daily basis, I've heard anywhere from 3 to 5 liters of water a day. Would you say that's about accurate?
It is a good representation of what most people probably should be taking in. If we, again, go kind of the textbook numbers, our largest fluid loss on a daily basis is urination. Most people urinate about 1.5 liters a day. They're going to lose another 0.5 liter in sweat, And I'm not talking about people who are exercising, just walking around. And then we actually lose a little bit of water when we breathe, what we call respiratory water loss. So total about 2.5 liters of fluid is coming out of us on a daily basis. If I'm drinking as much as you said, I know I'm replacing it. And you have to remember, when you take in fluid, it does go back to where it has gone from, where you've lost it. But sometimes we urinate it off faster than we get rehydrated. And so I always tell people, think about, if this is how much you've lost, take about 1.5 of that. If I lost 3 liters today, total fluid loss, I should probably drink about 4.5 liters. If I lost 2 liters today, 3.5. So because we have this ability to, as soon as we put fluid in, it gets inside our stomach, it gets inside of the blood, it moves into our muscle, it moves into wherever we've lost fluid, but our little kidneys just work so hard to get rid of it, they sometimes eliminate it before it's had a complete chance to move into all the tissues that have lost it. So you overcompensate and just drink about 1.5 your loss. And people are like, well, how do I know what do I lose? Well, if you're normal, typical, okay, it's going to be 2.5 liters a day. If you're in Carolina on a hot day, any of us in the context of an hour of working on our yard, going for a jog or a walk, we can lose another 1 to 1.5 liters of fluid.
Wow,
easily.
you don't really think about losing that much.
Yeah.
So let's say a typical day on, a warm day. You're out there and you're hiking 15, 20 miles. Would you say that you would lose another liter, 2 liters through the course of that?
So the amount of fluid you lose through sweating is a function of what the environment is, how hot it is, all right? But the intensity and the duration. And if you're doing a relatively intense activity, an hour, you're going to lose a liter of water an hour, all right, to dissipate heat, to keep you from overheating. So if you think about, I just spent 4 hours doing that total in the context of a hike and maybe even more, mathematically think real quickly, I'm losing a liter an hour. I've just done 4 hours. Wow, that's 4 extra liters of fluid loss that day.
Wow. And here I was thinking, this paddle trip that I recently did in South Carolina, we, over the course of 7 days, we would paddle roughly 8 hours a day. Pretty solid. I added it up. My GPS told me that we paddled a cumulative amount of 2 days, 2 hours, and however many minutes and seconds of constant paddling. I thought I was doing good by drinking about 5 liters of water a day. And now this was in South Carolina. It was getting up into the 80s in the day. Yeah. My God, it was hot at sometimes. I feel like I should have probably doubled that, even though I didn't feel dehydrated.
Yeah. And our thirst mechanism is probably not the most sensitive indicator to tell us where we are with our fluid balance. Lots of our regulatory mechanisms in our body are just really fantastic. But I always tell my students in my human physiology class, thirst is one of those things where if you sense you're thirsty, you're already low in your water content. You may think, I'm thirsty and I'm just a little bit. You're probably more than a little bit. It just doesn't have a fine
drink before you're thirsty.
Yes. Now, I'm old enough that I can remember being in graduate school and undergraduate walking around, and you never saw people with water bottles. Now,
it's stylish.
The person who doesn't have a water bottle is the one that draws your attention. Sure. So I do think people are more cognizant of the need to be drinking fluid in that fashion. But when you're doing chronic activity, and again, lots of these things are at high intensity or higher intensity. People are like, you were walking pretty slow. Well, if you're going up a mountain, walking pretty slow is pretty rough.
It's pretty intense.
Yes. If you're kayaking and, we're not going with the current in this particular.
I was amazing. I was in a headwind the entire time, 7 solid days.
Yeah.
Not fun.
It requires lots of what we call thermoregulatory capacity. When you do activity, you generate energy, but you generate heat. And our body generates lots of heat. We have to dissipate it. And our main way of dissipating it physiologically is sweating. All right. And that sweat evaporating. And you got to have water in your body to form sweat.
And I will, when we're on our long hikes, I'm less hungry. So I'll find myself eating less food. Mm-hmm. And then I will also drink less water. And I'm hurting my performance overall because I'm dehydrating myself over the course of these days.
Yeah, it's a well-known scientific fact. 2 to 3% dehydration based upon your body weight reducing, your muscles don't work as well. And you may, I'm a little tired. Well, part of that fatigue, that tiredness is from the loss of water. And if we push it a little more, 3, 4, 5%, not only do your muscles not work as well, there's plenty of evidence to say cognitively, you're not quite as alert. Your reasoning is not quite as good. And that can result in you perhaps making a bad decision. In the context of hiking, foot placement can, the wrong foot placement, suddenly you've got a severe injury. Well, we know that injury rates go up in athletes when they become dehydrated because they're making mistakes that they normally wouldn't because they're not thinking as well.
Now, you mentioned carbohydrates being one of the keys to being able to keep you energized and moving. I've often heard this concept of carbo-loading before you go on a run or something like that. Is there any truth to that? Does it really matter?
Yes, it's true, but.
I knew there was a but.
So carbohydrate loading is a procedure that scientifically was developed or really found back in the 1960s and became very popular in the 1970s. Its proper name is called muscle glycogen supercompensation. But carbo loading is much easier. Yeah, carbo loading is much easier. So it's a process by which you reduce your activity. You have an event coming up. I know on Saturday we're going up to Asheville and we're going to pick up a trail and we're going to be gone for the next 4 days. And you're kind of peaking for that because you want to perform that well. Or you've got a marathon in Raleigh coming up. So what you would typically do is you look at the date where the event's going to occur. You back calculate a week and say, okay, the week before that, I'm going to actually rest up a little bit. I'm not going to do as much regular activity because I want my muscles to be kind of fresh and ready to go at it on the day of the event. And while you're resting up, you're increasing your carbohydrate intake. And it's a matter of just stair-stepping up. I normally eat about half my calories a day in carbohydrate. Okay, I'm going to do closer to 60 or 70%. Some people might, if they're already high carbohydrate intakers, might even push that to 70 to 80% of their calories, which is a lot of carbohydrate to eat. But what you're doing is you're adding to the reserves of your muscles. All right. And your muscles store carbohydrate. And that means when you go to start the event, you've got this extra carbohydrate energy reserve stored. And so now I don't have to worry about perhaps packing in as much carbohydrate. But what you have to remember is you start with those extra stores, but you still can deplete them. So you're going to have to make certain over the course of a couple hours, if you're doing a marathon, over the course of a couple of days, if you're hiking, that you've got access to further carbohydrate. And to something like a marathon, again, I tell people, if you're going to be taking in some carbohydrate, do the liquid. Do the liquid because you're working on hydration. In the context of a hiker, well, all right, do the liquid, but make certain now, because you're going to do this over several days, your meals in the evening are very carbohydrate based. Now, couple caveats here, okay? So let's say, Gary, you really don't want to run a marathon, 26.2 miles.
Okay, I'm on board with that.
All right. And you're like, I'm doing the Carrboro 10K. All right. That is a great fun race. Lots of things to go enjoy and do throughout it. You don't need a carbo load. All right.
Darn, I was already envisioning this
I know.
a day's worth of Oreo cookies beforehand.
Yes. Well, I would probably recommend a few other nutritional recommendations on your carbo intake. But the reason I say for the Carrboro 10K, we know that carbohydrate loading works and helps your muscle perform better, but the use of your muscle has to be over an extended period of time. A marathon is a couple hours. Okay, that's great. A 10K, under an hour.
Yeah.
You probably have plenty of carbohydrates stored in your muscle, even on a regular diet, to go run a 10K. Well, why carbo load? Why run better? Probably not. Again, the issue of carbo loading is to prevent your muscles from running out of carbohydrate later on, after hours, or in the case of hiking, days later. You're just not running fast enough or long enough in a 10K to really need carbo loading. Now, people like to do it. It is fun. You get to like, all those things I'm probably not supposed to eat this much of, I get to. And so if people like it in the context of part of their psyche and preparing for an event, knock yourself out. Go do it. But physiologically, am I going to do better? No. All right. Psychologically, am I going to feel better because I've prepared in that fashion and I like to prepare? Probably yes. And in that case, that's fine. That's fine.
So I'm curious, let's move to the recovery side of this for a second. I've read in the past, like if you go to the gym for the day and you work out really hard, a good recovery could be chocolate milk, because it's going to give you a little bit of a sugar spike, but then there's also the protein that comes from the dairy, the calcium, things like that. I've also read articles. I personally love the idea of a beer after you work out. It's supposed to mentally relax you as well as give you a carbohydrate spike, and maybe you have some cheese and pepperoni on a piece of bread. I'm just spitballing here.
See why we need you. Do you see the problem?
But yeah, there's all this conversation around how you recover, and like on let's take hiking for instance. You've hiked all day, or you're going to set up camp for the night. You need to recover from that day's activities and also sort of prep yourself for the next day. Let's talk about recovery.
Okay. The activity in and of itself, whether we're hiking, whether we're kayaking, whether we're canoeing, whether we're running that marathon, that's what we want to do. That's our test for the day to see how well we prepared, and in some cases, enjoy just beautiful scenery that's just amazing. We sometimes forget afterwards, that's an important period. That recovery time, whether that's like, okay, I'm not running another marathon for 6 months, all right? Or, okay, I've got the next 12 hours to just kick back and relax a little bit until we pick up the trail again tomorrow. That recovery time is very critical. Again, I mentioned earlier, carbohydrate, we just don't store it well, all right? The form of carbohydrate you have in your muscle, we call it muscle glycogen. All right. If you took off running and you were running for an hour and a half, and you were running pretty much as hard as you could for an hour and a half, you would pretty much wipe out all your muscle glycogen.
Wow.
All right. That's it. That's all we got stored. Now we have some in our liver, but what's in our liver is really trying to maintain our blood sugars, which is to keep our brain functioning. All right. So that muscle carbohydrate, that muscle glycogen, that's a real limiting factor. Now, carbohydrate loading, I can make that go to 2 hours, all right, before it's exhausted, but it's still exhausted. So what you find is during the evening between repetitive bouts like hiking, it becomes really important to, one, listen to your body. Where do you hurt? All right. Pay some attention to that. If that requires a little self-massage, if that requires some assessment on, equipment wise, I was not doing something right today. Or, I don't like using my walking sticks because that makes me feel like an old man. But when I do, I actually do better. Okay. I'm going to use my walking sticks tomorrow. So a little bit of self-assessment. Fluid, work on the fluid. Think about, okay, how much was I sweating today? Did it seem like a hot day? Did I drink a lot, or I just got lost in the scenery and forgot to drink? Okay. Think about your fluid, and then think about, all right, I need to eat. we normally eat bulk. All right. Okay. We finally fixed everything. Let's sit down and eat. It would be good. You're setting up camp. Eat a little something. If that's a Cliff Bar, go for it. All right. If that is, I'm not going to go with the pizza and the pepperoni. All right.
I'm not packing that in anyway.
It is. I have a great story about Mount McKinley and a pizza being flown in. But that's another time. But get a little something right away. All right. And in the context of fluid, get something right away and then later have your larger meal, which again, that's usually communal time where you're all sitting around getting to really hash out the day. A beer is nice. It does have carbohydrate. It does have fluid, but it also has alcohol, and that's a diuretic.
Yep.
So it makes you urinate. And the problem is you're kind of like, well, I'm taking in fluid to replace what I lost during the day. Oh, it's making me urinate out what I just put in. It's a zero-sum game at best. So I would always tell people, if socially, and it does allow you to relax and just, what a great day, do it. But you've got to make certain you're getting water.
Sure. Having a beer, but still hydrating as well at
yes,
best.
Exactly. And then, after the main meal, again, and I'm thinking more in the context of hiking, if you think through, did I eat a lot today? Did I consume a lot of carbohydrate? Great. If not, finish off the evening with another little snack. And again, if that's a candy bar, if that's good old peanuts and raisins, good old Gorp, if that's a Cliff Bar, well, it's okay. It's okay. I think part of the problem I see sometimes is people like, yep, I'm going to rest, recover, I'm going to refuel, but they try to do it all in a 30, 60-minute period around a meal. And it's going to be better if there's a little before, some during the meal, a little after, kind of spacing it out through those hours. It's easier on our digestive system. It is in the context of reducing some of your fatigue feeling, getting some energy reserves in, letting the body, really recover from the day.
And I've heard similar things as far as hydration. You don't gulp your water and chug it or anything. You want to sip it, over the course of a period. That way, it lets your body have a chance to absorb it.
And again, I was actually talking about this in my undergraduate human phys class. We were talking about kidney function, and I was telling them, if you at the end of exercise or at the end of a day, if you're really thirsty and you want to chug down that liter of cold water, go ahead and do it. All right. But recognize because you're taking it in a large volume very rapidly, you're going to cause yourself to urinate out a lot of that. Go ahead and do it if it makes you feel good, but think in the back of your mind, okay, now that I've quenched my initial thirst through the rest of the afternoon, through the rest of the evening, I need to keep sipping and getting fluid in.
So you wouldn't be worried about cramping or anything by just guzzling that liter of water?
I've
heard both sides of that argument.
I wouldn't. Again, being smart is the answer. If I chug that down, don't think I'm done with my fluid replacement.
Gotcha.
But if that makes you feel good and you're like, all right, I'm actually rewarding myself for the last couple hours of work, great. Okay. But don't think, okay, one and done. Think about the fact. I do worry about people who are, I just want to sip through. They may be so sparing in their fluid intake that they may not get enough. All right.
That's a good point too.
Yeah. So it's, there is such a thing as overhydration and having hyponatremia, which is basically you've taken in so much fluid, so much water that you're losing lots of sodium from your body, which can cause physiological problems. It's rare, but it occurs. I think the problem is more towards people becoming underhydrated or dehydrated, being too sparing in fluid intake.
All right. Such great information. I'm rethinking how I approach the outdoors because I have not been smart. I'm learning now. But there's so much information out there. I think you were really helpful. I've been afraid of carbs. I've been told no carbs, low carbs. So getting the freedom to use them as fuel in a smart way is really terrific. But that leads me to the whole, there's so much information out there. How do we know what's right or what's wrong? How do we know the next superfood that comes out is really a superfood that we should start looking for in the grocery store? How do we evaluate the nutrition information that we're bombarded with every day?
Most certainly, we are bombarded. And even as someone who works in the field and consumes lots of scientific information as best I can't keep up with it. All right. And even if I have all my graduate students and undergraduate students as a cohort, we can't all keep up with it because the volume of information. And regrettably, there are no truth police for the internet. And so people can put things up, make claims. There are many supplements and nutritional aids, however we want to term it, that the FDA tries to police, but the FDA is overworked and underfunded. And so there are many things out there that they just haven't got around to yet, and because of their workload, may not. So I think to answer your question is, one, if it sounds too good to be true, it may just not be true. All right. And so if it sounds like a wonder drug, a silver bullet, it is probably something that you're going to have to need to be suspect on. All right. If it has lots of endorsements, in particular, celebrity endorsements or experts without academic training, but still referred to as experts, I consider it suspect. If it's a product that is discussed and they provide you the references, like, okay, here's the scientific studies on this, I feel better. But even in that context, I check out the scientific studies. Oh, this is a well-designed research study, which, again, I have the criteria for being able to assess that, and maybe not everyone does. But what you're looking for is it something that is from a known, reputable academic institution or research institute? Are they using adequate numbers of people? Research studies on humans, they can be as small as 5 or 6 humans, or they can be as big as 60,000 humans. The number matters because we know that the smaller what we call sample size, the more likelihood that that's not a finding that could be replicated. That's a finding that might have a potential error in interpretation. So you're trying to look for studies that, well, gee, they didn't just do this on 12 people that happened to walk through their laboratory. They got larger numbers. And then I look for, gee, this is a really interesting finding. Has anyone else ever found this? I look for replication. One study does not prove anything. And I'm certain you get just as frustrated as I might when we see something on a news cycle, either on the web, television or such, and it's a study found this, and now this is the new superfood. This is the new cure for XYZ. And it's like, that's only one study. You go show me 10 studies. You go show me 50 studies that substantiate that. I'm going to start to believe you a little bit. All right. And I think, regrettably, the public and the news media, get sold information that is interesting, perhaps correct, perhaps factual enough that it could in the future be something we really want to incorporate into our lifestyle, but they jump the gun. They jump the gun and try to really play it up for far more than it is at this moment in time.
So we just need to use some common sense and eat real food.
It
sounds so boring, doesn't it?
Well, I will tell you, I think real food is great. All right. There are so many wonderful foods out there, and there are so many different things you can do with it. It takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of thought on your part, but it's just hard to beat real food.
So I'm curious then, you're an outdoorsman. If you're going to go out for more than 2 nights, what's in your pack?
Okay, so what's going to be in my pack? All right, plenty of water mixed with something, again, to slip in a little carbohydrate for me, a little bit of the electrolytes. All right, a couple liters of that it's going right in the pack, and then dried powder to be able to mix in new. I am going to have some snacks that I can have throughout the day. All right. I mentioned peanuts and raisins. I am addicted to peanuts and raisins. All right. And so you're going to just see that. But to get more carbohydrate in it, because peanuts do tend to have much more protein, I'm going to put more dried fruit in with it. So it's going to have some chopped apricot. It's going to have some dried cherries, some cranberry. So it's not going to just be raisins and peanuts, but I'm going to have a couple pounds of that as a snack that I can always put my hand into. And then I like potatoes. All right. I like potato-based things when I'm hiking as my carbohydrate source. And so I'm going to look for any of the camping foods that I can take in that context that I can rehydrate. And then protein-wise, I'm not a big person for when I'm hiking to have a lot of protein. So I will probably have something that's light and easy. Beef jerky, kind of dried meat things. They tend to be a little salty, so I'm conscious of overdoing that, but something in that context. And then I like dairy-based things for protein, so I'm always going to have some cheeses in there. And again, you have to pick something that you can keep well enough for the hiking. And depending on where I am, one of the things I'll typically try to do is, we're up in Fancy Gap, Virginia, right up there on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and we're going to pick up a couple apples. All right. That is apple growing territory there. Again, it's bulky. It's not the easiest thing to pack in, but some fresh fruits or some fresh vegetables, just in the context of something to mix in with my meal on a regular basis. So it's not all prepackaged and dehydrated.
Yeah, the good thing about food in general is your pack gets lighter every time you eat. Well, Tony, it's been a pleasure having you here with us. Some great information. I know we're both rethinking our next trip. I've already picked up a couple ideas, especially the hydration packets. Had never thought about using that as a way to get my carbs in. That's, as a diabetic, it's like, no, I'm not going to drink any calories. I'm not going to drink any of my carbohydrates, but it is a great way to work that in.
It's so smart on the trail. It's so smart, which is why we had you join us today. Do you have any last parting words for our listeners today? Any takeaway for them?
I think common sense is something you want to apply when you're thinking about food and what you're going to do in the context of these kinds of sporting activities. I think in preparing your body, you don't go just run a marathon on Saturday, all right, if you haven't trained. You don't go hike for a week on Saturday if you haven't trained. Think about what your goals are and use progression to get your body in shape for those goals. And then in the context of some of the things that will be out there being cool, maybe sexy, let's try this. Step back, use some common sense, and think about, does this really sound too good to be true? Yes, then it's probably not true. It's probably not. And then I would say as a third thing, use the expertise of the people around you. Folks such as yourself, all right? Whether it's through this program or through one-on-one dialogue, but, people who do these kinds of things love sharing it, and they are going to share great information. You just got to ask.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for everything. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure too. Thank you.
Gary and I are always on the lookout for new gear, new food, new things we can try out in the outdoors. So we decided to subscribe to the Cairn box. It's an outdoor box providing 2 food items in each box and 2 usable items in each box that you could take outdoors and enjoy. So we bought 2 months worth of boxes and we have them here in front of us. So if you hear crinkling, that's us actually picking up the goodies. What did you think about the boxes, Gary?
I'll say that generally speaking, they were okay. And the reason that I say they were okay is because I always like experimenting with the little food items. There's so many different things out there in the world today that it's no longer just trail mix and oatmeal or something like that. There's some really cool stuff. So like in this very first box, we got a Bobo's toaster pastry, a really fancy Pop-Tart, which would be...
It's vegan, it's gluten-free, no GMOs.
Exactly. My complaint with this food item, along with the stuff in the other box, is everything is very high in carbohydrates and sugars. Take, for instance, this toaster pastry is 47 grams of carbohydrates and 22 grams of sugar, and 260 calories. So while I know that Dr. Hackney definitely encourages you to get some carbohydrates in your body. As a diabetic, I still have to be mindful of that. And to me, this is not necessarily a diabetic friendly snack. However, I bet it's delicious and would, be quite enjoyable out there. It also came with this little apple pie, sort of like a muffin that looks really delicious. I'm sure that it is, but...
Crinkle, crinkle.
So on this muffin, there's 24 grams of carbs in there along with 9 grams of sugar. So this one's not as bad. However, it's much smaller. It's very dense. It feels like a rock.
Yeah, but it's literally one bite.
Yeah, it's an amuse-bouche for the trail.
It's like, it's about the size of a piece of sushi. But I do enjoy the food and to experiment. And again, both of them are high in carb, but if you're on a multi-day high endurance activity, that's not so bad.
And so in addition to the food, it came with some sort of hands-on items, a speaker and a Frisbee. What'd you think about those?
What I look for in a box, and I do get a lot of boxes, I'm sort of a subscription box addict, is I like to get to experiment with products I might not buy on my own, or I might not be aware of. It's opening your eyes to new products and new things, and it's letting you try them in sort of a sampley way. So, when I think of a hiking box, I know I'm not going to get a hammock in here. But I still think I should get, small gadgets that have a purpose for me. And in this first box, there was a little speaker.
A Bluetooth speaker.
A Bluetooth speaker, which is fine. But I think I've shared before, it drives me absolutely insane to be in the wilderness and have to listen to somebody else's music. So I don't want to be the person playing the music. So when I first saw the speaker, I'm like, are you kidding me? I will say on Cairn's behalf that they put a little newspaper in, and the one that came with the speaker had music, outdoor etiquette tips, which I thought was great. But the speaker to me was nothing. You took it right away. And then the whole Frisbee thing. Are you kidding me?
It was cute. It was like a knitted Frisbee. It wasn't just, a piece of plastic. It was kind of cute. Maybe if you had a dog and you wanted something to occupy them, great. But one of the things that really stood out to me was the speaker. Naturally, I'm an audio nerd, and I grabbed it and tried it out. It sounds okay for what it is. It's a tiny little speaker, but it's made by a company called Spiaqua, and they design speakers that can be clipped onto a surfboard. So you would automatically assume that it would be waterproof. Well, they make a bunch of waterproof speakers, and they make one that is not. That's the one that was included in this box. So one, I can't imagine why a company would make a speaker that is not waterproof, but they're surfboard oriented. And then if Cairn's going to include one, why not include the waterproof one? I priced out every item in the box and wanted to find out how much would it cost me to buy all these on my own. Is Cairn actually offer me any type of a value by subscribing to them? And the answer was no. They saved me $4. So
on this box,
on this particular box.
Yeah.
And, I would have hoped that there would be a better value there. This doesn't come down to, oh my God, I want to save money. This is not how I'm, going out to stock up my outdoor supplies, on a budget. But
yeah, I definitely, want value. But for me, I really wanted to experience something new. And then our second box came. So we were highly disappointed with the first box. You were actually out of town when it came. I opened it and just went, oh, and I closed it and waited till you came back. And I don't mean to be hard on Cairn. I'm sure there are people who really enjoy this. Second box came though, and I'm like, please be better. And I like both food items in this. This one was a morning themed box, and it had performance oatmeal, which has caffeine in it already in your oatmeal.
Loving it.
That's great. It has 11 grams of protein. It has all of those, healthy things, matcha and goji berries and all of that, and would be a great on the trail option. I was excited about that. We haven't tried it yet, but I'm excited to try it. And then there was this nice, and I didn't mention the company this came from. It's a company called Picky Oats. I think that looks really exciting. There's a Jones bar is the name of this company, and it's a bar that only has 4 ingredients: mango, almonds, dates, and chia seeds. Sounds delicious. Certainly something good if you're on an endurance event because it has all of those carbs. So again, in both boxes, the food items look good. I can't wait to actually try them. In both boxes, the stuff is where it got disappointing.
Yeah.
Now this box had the best item we received, which is a stainless steel water bottle from a company called Eco Vessel. It's really nice. It's a high quality, nice water bottle. You can hear me opening it right now. Stainless steel, insulated. Love it. I love stainless steel water bottles. I carry one all the time. This will go into the mix. Am I really trying anything new here? No. I've had stainless steel water bottles before. Now, I love this one. It'll get used, but I'm not super excited. The thing that really sort of irritated me about this box was that they sent the second item was paracord. It's just string.
And I do love paracord, I've got to say, and I've got a lot of paracord, so I didn't need more paracord. But at the same time, can you ever have too much paracord? Well, the complaint that I have here is not that they sent me paracord with a carabiner. It's that the paracord is 325 paracord, not the typical 550 that you would get. So it has a much weaker tensile strength. I love paracord, and I'll make use of this. It's not like it's unusable, but I was very disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you'll have fun with it, but string and
if the kids get out of hand, I can always tie them up with
there
it.
you go. String and a paracord. I was like, in a box, really? I need to sample this? I don't need to sample this. If I've been outdoors for more than 5 minutes, there's paracord somewhere around. So I just found that really disappointing.
Yeah.
And overall, are these terrible boxes? Absolutely not. No. Will people enjoy them? I'm sure there's some people who will enjoy them. I just found them disappointing, and they made me sad. And subscription boxes are supposed to make me happy when they come in.
They did not spark joy.
This did not spark any joy. Again, the food items look great. Can't wait to try them. But everything else was just like a meh. So at the end of the day, the Cairn subscription box is not Inside Outside approved. However, we're going to be trying more outdoor subscription boxes. There are more, lots of different ones out there, and we're going to try them all. And if you have any recommendations, please send them to us through our social media.
Inside the Outside is proudly brought to you by Terrapin Outfitters. Terrapin Outfitters is an innovative company that specializes in developing clothing and gear that enhance people's enjoyment of outdoor activities. Check them out at terrapinoutfitters.com.
And follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Look for the handle Inside the Outside Show.
For links to our social media and other stuff that we talk about in the show, be sure to check out the show notes and our website, InsideTheOutsideShow.com.